When European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced the new EU-US trade deal, it was immediately controversial. European commentators and some leaders derided it as a capitulation, and noted that not only was the deal one-sided, it also threatened to undermine Europe's reputation.
President Trump has made tariffs the centerpiece of his second term. He calls them reciprocal tariffs, meant to protect American trade and defend U.S. industries. But the strategy is now straining his closest partners. In Europe, the latest deal with Washington set a 15% tariff ceiling on most EU goods, paired with sweeping commitments from Brussels to buy American energy, semiconductors, and even military hardware. The agreement was promoted as a success, yet it is already on shaky ground inside the European Parliament.
Donald Trump is so unpredictable. I don't even know if he knows what he's doing tomorrow morning. So we have to beat him at his own game and make sure that we're more competitive and onshore as many products as possible.
Across the Atlantic, Canada has been stuck in talks with Washington without progress. Ottawa insists it will not sign a lopsided agreement, and the exchanges so far have failed to resolve key disputes. Both allies are at an impasse. And if the EU deal collapses while Canada decides to push back harder, one of the most vulnerable American industries could suddenly be in the crosshairs: lobster. Lobster may sound like a niche product, but it represents a lifeline for thousands of families along the coast of Maine and New England. The industry depends heavily on two foreign markets. The first is Canada. The United States and Canada maintain an integrated North Atlantic supply chain worth over $1 billion a year. American boats haul in live lobster. Much of it is trucked straight across the border to be processed in Canadian plants and then re-exported to international buyers. Canada also ships lobster back into the U.S. market, creating a tightly linked two-way trade. The second is the European Union. Since 2020, American lobster has entered the EU tariff-free. That exemption was reaffirmed under the latest EU-US framework, which placed food products, including lobster, outside the new tariff regime. The result has been steady sales of about $90 million a year, according to EU trade statistics. While that is smaller than the Canada channel, it carries political weight because the duty-free treatment was once heralded as a diplomatic win. What makes lobster especially fragile is its nature as a perishable seasonal product. There is no way to stockpile months of catch. Any disruption at the border or sudden cost increase hits prices at the dock immediately, leaving fishermen exposed. This dependence on allies' goodwill turns lobster into a clear test case for how trade policy collides with everyday livelihoods. Now consider the scenario if Europe's deal with Trump collapses and Canada decides to retaliate further. The tariff exemptions for food would vanish in Brussels, and Ottawa would be free to pick targets. Lobster is the obvious candidate. If the EU restores an 8% duty, American exporters would face annual losses of about $9 to $13 million based on current trade volumes. For Canada, the impact would be far larger. A 10% tariff on U.S. lobster shipments could strip away $45 to $53 million each year. At 25%, the losses rise to between $115 and $135 million. Combined, the American industry could forfeit anywhere from $55 million to $150 million annually. Beyond those headline numbers, prices on Maine's docks would fall as buyers pull back, intensifying the blow to local communities. This is the definition of backfire. The White House aims to protect American trade, yet retaliation would land hardest on American workers and small businesses who have no alternative markets ready to absorb their catch. The story of lobster captures the contradictions in Trump's trade strategy. Allies like the EU and Canada may bend under pressure, but they also hold levers of their own. They can shift purchases, forge new trade ties, or selectively target industries that cut deep into America's heartland. For Brussels and Ottawa, lobster is one of those pressure points. For Washington, the consequences would be immediate and visible. Families who depend on lobster fishing cannot simply wait out a trade war. Unlike energy or technology, there is no substitute market that can replace the steady demand from Canada and Europe. Instead of consolidating America's strength, tariffs risk leaving the U.S. isolated, damaging trust with allies, and undermining industries that depend on open access. Lobster may be a small sector in the grand scheme of global trade, but it shows how economic pressure can circle back. What was designed to protect American trade may end up weakening the very communities Trump promised to defend.
Tourism in Las Vegas is in a big slump this summer, costing the city billions of dollars. Some are saying that could signal trouble ahead for the U.S. economy.
This summer in Las Vegas tells a story that reaches far beyond the bright lights of the Strip. Crowds are smaller, hotel workers are bringing home half the tips they earned last year, and even simple purchases like a drink now leave visitors with sticker shock. The city reported an 11% drop in total visitors in June, according to local officials. For an economy that depends on constant traffic from tourists, that decline means billions of dollars lost. At the heart of this downturn lies a question that is echoing across America. Are President Donald Trump's tariffs and tougher border rules slowly choking the life out of U.S. tourism? The administration has leaned heavily on tariffs as a show of economic power. But those policies, along with stricter immigration enforcement, are now colliding with one of America's most visible industries.
Is Las Vegas dying, or is it all hype?
It is dying. Not only with the tourism, but with the pricing. The consumer looks at it and says, man, I'm paying this much for this. I just don't see the value.
Las Vegas has become the clearest warning sign. The mayor has confirmed that the number of Canadian visitors flying into the city has collapsed by 40% so far this year. For a market that once supplied a steady stream of guests, the faucet has indeed slowed to a drip. That drop alone helps explain why casinos, restaurants, and shops are all feeling the squeeze. The pain shows up in everyday paychecks. Restaurant workers who used to earn between $150 and $200 a day in tips now see only $50 to $60. Tourists are still spending, but the crowds are thinner, and higher prices on hotels, meals, and drinks make people think twice about returning. Experts in Nevada are warning that Las Vegas cannot simply charge more to make up the difference. A city that built its reputation on offering value is losing the very appeal that made it unique.
I think since 2006, the number of people coming from the U.S. to Canada is more than the number of people crossing from Canada into the U.S.
The contrast becomes clearer when looking at what is happening across the border. Canada has faced the same tensions, with its citizens cutting back on trips south. Customs and Border Protection data shows 2.4 million land entries from Canada into the United States in July 2025. That was 500,000 fewer than the same month last year. The decline has been sharp enough to hurt duty-free shops along the border. The Frontier Duty-Free Association reports sales in July were still down nearly 37%. One store in New Brunswick even closed its doors after more than 40 years of business. Yet Canada itself is not standing still. For the first time since 2006, outside of the pandemic years, more Americans traveled north than Canadians traveled south. Statistics Canada confirms that in June and July, cross-border flows tilted in Canada's favor. Families, baseball fans, and summer travelers increasingly chose Canadian cities as their destination. Even with some struggles at border towns, Canada has managed to present itself as a stable and welcoming option. In this climate, Prime Minister Mark Carney's message of patience and openness is resonating not just with trade partners, but also with ordinary travelers.
The lesson is clear. President Trump's tariffs were meant to project strength, yet their ripple effects are hurting American tourism. From the Strip in Las Vegas to border duty-free shops, the sector is losing visitors, especially Canadians who once came in steady numbers. At the same time, Canada is quietly turning the tide. More Americans are crossing north, and Canada's image as stable and welcoming is paying off. While Trump's approach makes the U.S. look less attractive, Canada gains simply by holding steady. In this contest, resilience is proving stronger than force. The real question is whether America can afford to keep driving travelers away while its neighbor turns caution into opportunity.
Setting a tariff for essentially the rest of the world, and that's what they're going to pay if they want to do business in the United States.
What happened to 90 trade deals in 90 days?
We've spoken to everybody. We know it's all done.
I think with Vietnam, the UK, with China, not all those are intended to be final deals either.
At the start of August, President Donald Trump declared victory. His global tariff campaign forced allies into quick agreements before his deadline. The promise was stability, with tariff caps around 15% in exchange for huge investment pledges in the United States. On paper, it looked like a win. In practice, details remain vague, and industries in partner countries still feel the strain. Washington's message is simple: invest big or face higher tariffs. That has left allies from Europe to Asia weighing short-term relief against the burden of massive commitments and the risk that Trump could change course again. Japan's auto sector shows the limits of these deals. The World Trade Organization reported that the average U.S. tariff rate now exceeds 20%, the highest in more than a century. For Japanese car makers, this is a real cost.
Short term, we have to brace for the impact. We work hard to find a way to overcome these incremental costs.
Mazda expects almost $1 billion in extra expenses this year. To cope, it is ramping up output at a $2 billion plant in Alabama, built during Trump's first term. That investment softens the blow, but half of Mazda's cars are still produced in Japan for the U.S. market. The company also relies heavily on a large factory in Mexico, which remains exposed until Washington finalizes terms with Mexico. The result is uncertainty, not stability. Europe's metal sector is in a similar bind.
Negotiations, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the framework trade agreement with the US will provide support for Europe's metal sector freight, but details remain in short supply.
Brussels reached a framework agreement with Washington, promising tariff cuts and a quota system. Yet steel and aluminum still face a punishing 50% duty. The quota system, which should allow some duty-free exports, is not yet defined. The European Steel Association says U.S. tariffs have already damaged an industry worth more than $90 billion a year and weakened by falling demand. Business leaders warn they remain in the dark with little more than promises to rely on. These examples show that rushing to sign has not removed the pressure.
Canada took another route. Ottawa refused to sign under pressure, accepting a 35% tariff on goods outside CUSMA as of August 1st. That sounds severe, but CUSMA continues to exempt the vast majority of Canadian trade. According to Scotiabank chief economist Jean-François Perrault, between 85 and 95% of exports remain tariff-free under the deal, when averaged, Canada's effective tariff rate is about 5 to 6%. That is painful, but still lower than the 15% rate faced by Europe, Japan, or South Korea. Although Canada has felt the pain of Trump's tariffs, the country is turning its focus inward. Rather than tying its future to Washington's demands, it is strengthening itself at home.
We've got a lot of work to do on major projects, on affordability, on security in our communities.
This was clear in the recent meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford in Ottawa, where leaders emphasized building national competitiveness and resilience. Some Canadians question whether the government is being too passive in the face of Trump's tariffs, but the data suggests that Canada has avoided the most punishing outcomes while keeping leverage for future talks. Unlike partners that promised hundreds of billions in investments, Canada has not mortgaged its long-term position for short-term relief.
What the Prime Minister actually said during the election campaign. No deal is better than a bad deal. And so we're not going to be in a hurry to sign a bad deal.
The contrast is clear. Nations that rushed to sign before August 1st now face heavy investment costs and lingering uncertainty. Japan's car makers and Europe's steel industry show that the pain did not disappear after the agreements. Canada, by holding firm, absorbed targeted damage in specific industries, but kept the broader economy intact and its negotiating position alive. This is not surrender. It is a strategy of endurance. With energy exports, critical minerals, and an integrated supply chain, Canada remains a partner the United States cannot easily replace. Trump may continue to escalate, but Prime Minister Mark Carney's approach shows that strategic patience is the strongest counterweight to Washington's unpredictable demands.